Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey, and welcome back to, or if it's your first time, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you very much for listening to our show. You know, we started this about a year and a half ago and designed this entire podcast to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm great, Thom. It's good to hear your voice. I'm looking forward to today's podcast, a little bit different. One of our board members suggested a person we want to chat with, and we're looking forward to their different perspectives on collaboration.
You guys are going to talk about collaboration, supply chain, integration of suppliers, etc. So I think it's going to be super interesting. So every single week, we try to be super interesting. We try to bring to this podcast really informative interviews and other ideas that are going to help all of our listeners enhance and grow their careers. Today, we have two guests. We have Digital Enterprise Society board member, Adam Specht, and he is with Tenneco, and he is the IT Director of Product Development. And we are also joined by Jim Schwarz from Intersphere Industries. Jim, Adam, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thanks, Thom.
Hey, appreciate it, Thom. Thank you very much.
So, Adam, give us a little bit of your background. I know that you're a board member for Digital Enterprise Society, but not everybody listening knows who you are. Give us a little bit of your career history.
Sure thing. So I started out working in high-tech electronics at Shure Incorporated in the early 2000s. I was working primarily on mechanical engineering, wound up working on a lot of cross-functional products or projects with supply chain, with change management, wound up getting involved very heavily with PLM technologies, and eventually wound up making a jump into the automotive industry over here in the Detroit area at what was Federal Mogul, which is now acquired by Tenneco. And my main role in life is focusing on PLM technologies, the CAD, CAM, CAE technologies, and really the integration of all of those things within the business.
And James, what about yourself?
Background's a little more varied, a few more years. I won't give away the age, but let's just say.
Yeah, but I might.
Yeah, okay, fair enough, if you figure it out. In any case, started in core manufacturing in a family business in my father's garage in the 70s, building raw printed circuit boards. Did that for almost 3 decades. Left that industry before it collapsed in the United States and moved on to core manufacturing, working for an organization that provided windshields and other accessories to motorcycles. And after a short stay there, moved to Shure. And that's pro audio, electronics, global supply chain, and literally traveled the globe, set up manufacturing in China, a myriad of experiences. From there, I went into a consultancy role for a couple of years to teach people how to use this really simple to use ERP called SAP. And I'm being really facetious. And then moved from there to core manufacturing to do a turnaround for a company locally. And then 3+ years ago, made the big jump to full-time running my own business. And my own business means I represent 22 companies and I sell to target customers across the Americas. So that's a quick summary.
So welcome, Jim. You and I are of a similar age. We'll just leave it at that.
Fair enough.
But we've both seen this amazing transformation from the way things were done in the 70s to the way things are done now, 50 some years later. And especially the application of computers and what is now called product lifecycle management, it's been pretty amazing. From your vantage point, you mentioned the collapse of an industry. Let's go there for a second. That particular industry, why did it collapse? Was there a cause or was it multifaceted?
It was an industry maturity curve combined with technical breakthroughs and core industries that drove rapid expansion and commoditization. Now, though that's a mouthful. So to give you a little better background, one of my key customers I was working with was Motorola, and I received a call one day and got dragged over to this building that it's a strange world in the Chicagoland area. The building actually used to be owned by Shure, which was an interesting coincidence, and that's all. In any case, I was walked to the back room by this materials manager, and he said, "Hey, check out this line." And I walked down this line, and I saw this big honking chip on there, and it looked like an analog board. I'm a double E background, so anyhow, I'm looking at that, and I get into, oh, that's an RF board, and then I see the keypad at the end. These are the first car phones in a mini line stuck in a building that's just being renovated. So we built the first boards for the first cell phones that existed on the planet, which is kind of an interesting tie into what caused the collapse. So
yeah, a lot of people don't remember Motorola was the innovator, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And innovation was their name. I mean, I've got this background you guys can see, it says innovative, you know. It's what they're all about. In any case, the volumes went crazy. And crazy means, you know, people took to this new technology, this thing called a cell phone. And that really drove a difference in the world as far as communication, access, interface, and the opening of new markets. And if you look at places like China, which I became extraordinarily familiar with over a long period of time, they never really had payment through anything but applications. It was all done directly. I mean, it was highly automated from the onset. The cell phone was the driver behind this, and cell phones drove circuit boards, going back to the beginning of the story, to be a commodity. The volumes were so huge. The investment, by the way, Ray, to be able to build a board, your investment structure is staggering on the capital on the capex side, and it changes every 3 years. So you have to reinvest. And the only thing worse in the world are semiconductors. And those have gone through substantial changes.
Yeah.
And I deal with them today.
Right.
You know, I try to get my hands on wafers for my suppliers who then support my customers, and it's the whole world's tied together right now. Anyhow, I'm talking too much, but I'm just trying to tell you that's sort of the background that caused an industrial revolution in electronics.
Right.
Everybody thought the PC was the big driver. No, it's the cell phone.
Yeah.
And it's truly what drove it.
And it happened over 2 cycles, right? Or more than 2 cycles, right? First, there was what you're talking about with Motorola and the first handheld devices. But then about 10 years ago, this thing called an iPhone, or maybe it's now more like 12 years ago, which then put everything else besides a cell phone application in your palm. By everything, I mean email and even visualization of your design if you're an engineer. And so it's kind of interesting that computing power in your hand ended up driving disruption in industries. And I wonder, from your vantage point, when you see this disruption, or were you able to see it coming? Because you're now helping companies around the world be a part of a supply chain, maybe some suppliers that supply Adam's company, which in turn supplies my old company, right? And a lot of this has moved. It moved either because you didn't have legacy costs, right? CapEx or whatever. Yeah. It might have moved just because of, you know, the car business. We wanted you to make it where we sold it, right? Wherever we assembled it. And so we would force supply chains to move to other parts of the world based upon where we did assembly, right? So any other things you can point out to us about this disruption and how you deal with it, how you cope with it?
Well, it's disruption on one side, but it's an integrated network on the other side. Okay. And in the last 3 years, that network has been, for lack of a better way to describe it, badly damaged.
Okay.
And we're not going to get into politics here, but when you start trashing,
but we do, just so you know.
Okay, but when you start trashing global supply chains,
well, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's insane,
havoc,
right?
Absolute havoc.
Right.
And we're all, you know, as the end game in that is higher costs for everyone. And that's really where we're headed.
But the truth is, when politicians mess with that, supply chains are pretty flexible. They'll just adjust around it. They will, right? And The
Well-
harder question for any economy that takes a dive is, well, is your OEM affected? And if the OEM's affected, is everybody else affected? So if you're in the middle, say a tier 2 or tier 3, you're going to go find another customer because they exist, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is, this virus problem is a real issue, as we've been talking in previous meetings. We won't dwell on it, but there are places in the world that aren't near as chaotic as what's going on in Europe and the United States as we speak. So even Canada is better off than the rest of the North American continent. And so my point here is suppliers will move. If they can find customers in those more stable markets, they'll move. This is one of the things that's a benefit of what's happened. Now, in your role, you're like I am. We're reaching the end of our working lives, hopefully. You're able to help others see how they can fit in, I assume, right? That's partly why you're the guy that helps glue it together.
It's probably, more self-serving, right? So the only way I make an income is by selling goods to somebody. And the only way that works in an industrial manufacturing is to sow relationships.
Okay.
And it's also this sow security in your supply chain. Show you that, hey, I've got something to offer you that's better than the other guy. Kind of around to the point you were making. And I really want to dig in here for a second. Adam hasn't said 2 words, but I really want to talk about PLM and how this all ties together and the bigger mess we've got to deal with, and the maturity levels that are scattered like buckshot in a big range.
So you're talking about PLM maturity.
Oh, well, oh my Lord.
What kind of maturity?
Yeah, precisely that, but the impact. So let's dive into that real quick. So first of all, to just take off from the statement you made, one of the most stable countries in the world right now from a COVID-19 perspective is Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a miraculous issue there on January 21st when they told everybody, yep, we're in a lockdown and everybody's getting tested and here's where you go pick up your mask and there's no choice and you'll be fined. And oh, by the way, if you fly into our country, we're going to quarantine you and it's not an option.
Right.
And guess what? Today, after about it's actually been about 130 days now, they haven't had one person infected. Now, that's 23 million people. So, talk about a beautiful world you could have had here.
Correct.
And I still claim it could have been done here, but we did nothing.
Worse than that, we confused everybody. We did more than nothing.
Okay, worse than nothing, yes. Going to PLM. So I'm dealing with a lot of people right now. You said, supply chains just get flexible and move around. What people do is they chase for cost and solutions so they can survive. That's really what's happening to a lot of manufacturers here in this country.
Mm-hmm.
I'm losing customers right now due to their sale. All their sales were to stadiums, and they were selling RFID cards. Well, not selling any more of those.
Yeah, not in stadiums.
I had another customer who, I will never name names here, but I had another customer who was making devices that go into restaurants. Yeah, not a good place to be.
Yeah.
And there's many, many more examples. There's a lot of industry that's been impacted simply because the costs have gone up and from a competitive perspective, if you happen to have a competitor who's in a country that isn't being battered by a trade war, you're now at a significant disadvantage instantly.
Yeah, I know. Let's elaborate on cost, because it's not always labor or material cost.
No,
it's things like tariffs.
It's landed cost. When people talk about cost, they got to be really careful. What does it cost to land at your door legally?
Yeah.
And I add the word legally because there's people playing games all over the place right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that aside, legally, what does it cost you to land your goods? And landing your goods at an effective price is impacted by everything in the supply chain.
Right.
And this is where PLM plays a huge role. And I'll speak quickly to minimize the time consumed. I'm working with people that are trying to move out of China fast and get into other countries. And now what I mean by fast is it took them 3 years to figure it out, because it's starting to really hurt them now financially. These tariffs are just exorbitant in taxes is what they are.
It's not a labor cost. It's not material cost. It's the other costs that politicians are driving, right?
Yeah, and it's horrific. And they finally figured out, oh, this is just too big a bite out of our P&L. We're not going to survive if this goes on. We need to move our production to another place. And I'll, of course, be the person with my hand up going, here, I can help you. And I find out that their supplier was an original design manufacturer in China who did all the design for them, who never shared the design documents, who, oh, by the way, really doesn't have decent documents. You want to talk about, I'd love to see it on paper, let alone electrons in a computer, you know, I mean,
Right.
So take a step way back and you've got a mess.
Yeah.
So we'll take products and whatever we can get our hands on and rebuild it and then build from that a product life management database, if you will, you know,
Okay.
some structure in place that's real now, finally, and then work with that customer on revision control and everything else. And please remember too, that when we deal with other things that are complicated, a car is complicated, Adam, I'll give you that. Let's put together an electronic circuit with a myriad of parts from all
Yeah, it
over
has
the
a few
world.
more parts.
The bigger issue is the life cycle on all those parts.
Right.
Which ones are not recommended for new designs? Which ones are end of life, et cetera, et cetera? And how do you manage all that? Now, think about what I just shot out quickly. You've got ODMs that were haphazardly throwing stuff over the wall on a good day, and you're trying to manage the life cycle of all the components in those assemblies.
Okay.
And now move them to another place in the world so you can, as a business here in the United States, survive because your costs have gone through the roof because your own government is trying to kill you.
Okay.
Think
So
about
so
that whole
that's
cycle.
so this, to your point, is for more flexibility, we need product lifecycle management. We
Oh,
really
my
need
God.
to manage the data. You know, in fact, you need, you know, the big OEMs. We insist on access to the design data at Adam's company and others because of exactly this, right? In the event the supply chain is disrupted, we'd have the choice to take it somewhere else, right? So
Oh, there's been other disruptions. If you think back a number of years ago, you'd see on the news heads hanging from bridges in Mexico.
well, that's ugly.
I led a team once where we had to figure out, okay, if Mexico was suddenly not available to us tomorrow,
Right.
as in like right now, what would we do?
Right.
If we had a factory in Mexico. So, you know, I mean, you want to talk about, you better have your data tight because, you know, try and move a whole plant in a day. It doesn't work.
The
You know,
Fukushima disaster a few years ago.
Well, there you go.
There's
There's another one.
it disrupted all of us because certain kinds of paint came from one place in Japan, which is amazing that it was one. But nonetheless, all the car companies ended up with their special projects to adjust, right? Otherwise, we
absolutely.
you know, if the folks at Daimler outpaced the folks at Ford and GM, well, they'd get the new paint quicker, and you know, at least in the car business, it's partly a style game, right? So having the best paint is a good thing. So Adam asked you to join us because you had these insights about PLM and about collaboration. Expand on collaboration a bit, and then I want to get Adam's perspective on that.
Okay, so I'll give you a real quick high level. Collaboration is great until the lawyers get involved.
Okay, so we get them out of the way. Okay, I get
that. But that little glib comment aside, and it's really not so glib. It's a big issue.
It is.
The first question is, who's your friend, who's your enemy? And now once you get past that and you have internal cohesive thinking around who are we working with and who are our friends, are you in an original design manufacturer relationship? Are you in an extended relationship? Are you simply sharing information where you're not giving away secrets, yet you're helping the industry in general? So no one's an enemy, no one's a friend. It's just we're all helping each other. It's all good. You really have to sort through that first. So collaboration in the simplest format is, like I've already used the example of original ODMs, where you're working with another company who's designing your products for you and will manufacture those products for you. And you're working hand in hand collaboratively to come up with the best possible design that reflects who you are as a company, not who the ODM is, right?
Right.
So that's collaboration. Another form of collaboration we look toward is capacity.
Right.
Who are we working with and what will they reserve for us? And who else can we leverage and how do we minimize risk? And risk plays a big factor. So the issue we had when the world was playing nice together 3+ years ago, people were just looking at cost optimization.
Right.
They weren't looking at risk as much, and that was kind of an error in way, if you will. So collaboratively, we work together as industries more than I think we have in the past, because we're understanding that the risk is elevating.
Right.
Highly optimized costs can create a lot of problems. Yes, there's benefits. You become a better competitor. You can take other people out of the marketplace. You can try and aggregate and buy up your competitors, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that has its benefits. Flip side, you have a lot of risk. And we're seeing it all come at us right now. And there's environmental factors that are starting to play up now. And I think they're going to go exponential.
So what are the keys to good collaboration, though? You said it well. You got to figure out where your friends are, or where there's, I might have said it as mutual interest, right? Even if I had a series of meetings with a competitor in the car business, and it was all about, well, what's our mutual interest? Our mutual interest was getting great commercial PLM tools, right? And so we chose to keep working with each other. We never talk about product, but we would talk about tools and how to use it and how to go through upgrades and all this other stuff, right? So we found mutual interest, I guess, and then collaborated on the mutual interest, right? Is it that simple? I mean, what's really difficult is if people bring their country flag with them, and then the countries choose to argue with each other. I mean, then you're a victim, right? I mean, really, everybody's a victim, right?
You have to know where to draw lines, yes.
Yeah.
And you work that out internally first, and with hopefully strong leadership, you present a position so you understand what you're doing in the broader marketplace. And to tie into what Adam and I have spoken to in the past, PLM is only successful if the organizations using a good product life management tool know how to use their ERP. They go hand in hand, if you will.
That's true. I didn't realize you were going to go there.
It's crucial.
This will be a longer interview, by the way.
Well, this I can wrap it up in a quick story. So
okay.
The consultant that I worked with for a couple of years would literally be paid a lot of money to go in and show people first how screwed up they were, and then teach them how not to be, and how to get that ERP to work for them. And the biggest response you'd hear when you'd walk in first is, "Oh, this SAP doesn't work."
Yeah.
No. And we do all our work on spreadsheets and Access, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm already having a coronary." So it's the most powerful tool on earth, and you're literally using Excel. Okay, this is interesting.
Well, it tells you something about the user acceptance, right? And to me, that's one of the major hurdles is people don't appreciate how you have to present something powerful like SAP to the end user, to the operator, whether that be a clerk counting parts or the ordering manager or somewhere in between, right? The point is if it's not easy to use, people go use this thing they got at home called a PC that has this thing called Excel. Yeah. Excel's the most flexible tool on the planet, except it breaks configuration management, and it doesn't really give you a way to track what happened, right? Which is back to enterprise resource planning and PLM. So yeah, it's interesting. I've spent a lot of energy on why did people keep using Excel? But the simple answer is because it's at their fingertips, right? Well, they could learn it quicker. Right?
They take snapshots. And just to finish my story real quick, we go in and do an audit using standard tools that SAP provides that nobody knows are there. By the way, part of the sin is SAP wouldn't teach their customers how to use their system. And that's very true, by the way.
To the tool vendors out there, especially the new ones, this is really important, and it is underestimated, right? The importance of teaching appropriate training. So good point.
How to leverage that tool completely. So we would show them first in reports where we'd say, guess how many exceptions you have in your supply chain between supply and demand. And these were large enterprises, but they had no idea. So we'd run the reports and we'd say, no, you hit the average, about 12,000. What that means translated quickly is material requirements planning could never possibly work. It's impossible in that environment, never.
So that ends up being an extra cost then, a burden. You either have waste or you have delays because you don't have enough supply, right?
Huge cost, and they would overbuy, and they'd have safeties everywhere, and they'd have warehouses full of stuff that would go obsolete, and on it goes.
So collaboration in that world would cause you to have a lot of phone calls at least to say, hey, I thought we needed 10 this week, and now you're telling me we need 70. right?
It's a mess. And in fact, once you leverage the system appropriately and know how to use it,
Yeah.
in other words, if they've been taught from the onset, and PLM is exactly the same story, by the way. If you don't understand how to use and leverage that tool completely, you're gonna fall into this same trap. But we would literally promise at the end of our gig with them, part of our contract, a 35% reduction in inventory and on-time delivery of 99.9% or better.
Yeah.
And by the way, we would deliver it.
Well, yeah.
You want to talk about saving a fortune? Oh my Lord.
And so you did that because of the experiences you've had, and you know you can do it, right? And successful companies, the one that weathers storms like the current one we're all going through, they get this figured out, either with folks like yourself helping them, or they have their own talent they've developed over the years, and they figure it out, right? And they try to stay more risk management. I like that point you made earlier, to things beyond material costs and labor costs and transportation costs. I mean, this has been one of the most funny things, or maybe serious things to look at in the past 6 months, is the fluctuation in oil prices. So,
well, one of the things that I think we could pick out a little bit is, you can actively manage that risk without even knowing what the risk is.
That's
by managing your data, right? One of the things that Jim was talking about was, taking one plant and having to lift it from one country to another, just purely based off of whatever happens to be going on at the time. And I think that what you see going on right now, with the COVID and whatever else, the companies that are being flexible and are going to manage through this the most effectively are the ones that had their data in order, whether it is their PLM data that describes the product, or their ERP data, which allows them to manage their inventory and the supply chain appropriately. If we have the ability, to avoid a certain location in the world because we had infrastructure and data set up in such a way that I could move it from supplier A to supplier B without having to do all of this entire, complete change to my supply chain, managing your data facilitates that. I think that's the key salient point.
So this flexibility, maybe this will be a survival of the fittest moment, right? Is the situation in industry that use digital tools, are the ones using it well for cost management also going to use it well for risk management? So what I'm getting at, guys, is this a matter of, no kidding, that people who've adopted it over the last 20 years, PLM and ERP, are they going to be the survivors because they have this ability? Or can somebody who's just hearing this maybe for the first time in a different forum, if they walk out of this saying, "Oh my goodness, I'm way behind. What do I do?" Well, some of them will call Jim, but what do they do? I mean, what do you guys? You guys are different generation, right? And so how do you know that you should be doing this? I mean, maybe a bitter pill is the answer, but meaning the current situations, but. How do you know you should be doing this? And if you aren't doing it, you're both making examples of people are not doing it. Well, why is that?
Well, let's maybe talk about some key indicators that you can see in your business that would say, I need to do this. I need to take certain steps. Uncontrolled inventory, right? If you have too much and you don't know really how to manage it, and you're saying, well, my inventory is worth, so much of my current debt that I have on my company, that's a key indicator that you need to do something to be able to manage that data appropriately, whether it's your MRP and your planning, or your demand and all of this stuff. That's a key indicator. I would say warranty returns.
Yeah.
Seeing those types of things. That's looking.
And what
coming into the automotive industry, that's been fascinating to see. Because you look at what's happened with some of our friends in town here, and specifically one that had some manufacturing issues with a particular launch happening in Chicago, in the past year or so.
everybody's going to scurry out and figure out who's got assembly in Chicago.
Right. But my point is
not too hard to figure out.
But my point is that, if they had their data and their processes managed systematically, that helps solve that problem. It's the integration of things and the flexibility of things that when you start to see problems like that, it's an indicator, hey, I need to make some serious moves to establish a strategy for my company that says, I need to invest some money here to avoid the risks down the road.
So based on what you guys are saying, a metric or a key indicator around collaboration, or if you will, successful collaboration, right? If people are calling repetitively on the same topic, I would suggest they're not collaborating well. They're talking with each other, but the fact that they have to repeat the discussion means that they're not got their data connected, right? Do you guys have other ideas about what's a key indicator for effective collaboration?
You could, and I was thinking about this, and I'm not sure how you break it down into a key metric,
okay,
or a key performance indicator. We all like to talk about KPIs, and that aside for a second. The more intact your data is, the more flexible you can be from a standpoint of immediately pivoting to another position.
Okay, so speed of change to a different, whether it's a volume thing or a design change.
Whatever it is. I mean, think about what we went through here in this country. If you want to know the real background on this, it's kind of interesting. So we suddenly had this run on toilet paper.
Yeah.
Right. This story is all about supply chain. Most people don't really know the background.
Right.
A huge portion of the population was using toilets in office buildings, right? They're working in your office, in a workplace.
Right.
Those are equipped with contracted services typically, and they're using big giant rolls. And there's a huge portion of if you look at it at a macro level, toilet paper makes next to no money. So it's all about volume.
Right.
Huge volume, which means they spent money and fully automated and locked in the formats. So from a supply chain and flexibility perspective, they may have had great data, but they locked themselves into something terrible. Yeah. And that is, they can only make X number of a certain format that went to homes and an X number of a format that went into everything else. Right. And the sudden shock on that supply chain, they couldn't switch over fast enough.
Right. So Jim, I'd say that's probably the most fascinating example of reuse of common parts that I've ever heard, right?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about a bathroom stall. What's different between your office bathroom stall and your home bathroom?
Doesn't it just mean we all need to buy the big spindles in our home room? Oh, never mind.
No, it's about part commonization and part standardization.
Right. It's a great story, but I didn't blow off your question, really. Okay. It's how quickly can you change?
Right. The speed of change is actually a good thing, right? Not a bad thing. And being flexible.
It's survivability. Right. So going back to my earlier story where you had ODMs, or what I'll loosely call an ODM in China, designing products for customers here, and they did it really cheap and everything's wonderful, but they had no documentation. So when a switch is required because of a global shock called a trade war, oh my Lord, how do we do this? And it takes years instead of weeks. Yeah. Is that a measurement? Well, I think that's a heck of a measurement.
For a little bit of my career, I was helping, approve release of parts, and we would have to go down the whole supply chain. And it was interesting. We get to a tier 3 or a tier 4 that behaved like that. And we would tell the tier 1, not the one in the middle, we'd tell them, you're going to fix that problem before we go forward. We won't give you the approval for mass production without that resolved. And so I do think everybody in the supply chain bears some responsibility. If you buy a part from such a place and you don't go do the adequate in-depth reviews and production audits, you kind of get what you took the risk on. I mean, you may look great on price, but you won't look good on risk management. So this is interesting. So use PLM, be aware of ERP and how it applies, and also get your flexibility hat on and change your measures on success to include risk management or flexibility. Speed of change, I think, is a really good idea. And I think it'll become a key metric for a lot of companies that don't already follow it. Hey, Adam, you've seen, you've got a front row seat to what's going on in certainly the car business. From a PLM and a DES point of view, what what surprised you the most about what's going on? And is it a collaboration issue, or is it other things? I mean, is it? I mean, we've always had volume fluctuations. Oil prices did that to car companies for a long time, right? The cheap oil in the spring caused a fluctuation the other way. It was kind of interesting to watch. But anyways, from your vantage point, what else should we be wary of in these COVID days?
I think that the thing that I see happening that surprised me a little bit, and what I see it actually impacting the future, is single sourcing in a specific one region and then shipping that part all over the world. Logistics has made it so it's real easy to go find the cheapest part you can buy anywhere in the world and then bring it to you. And this whole thing has put a stop to that. So
Yep.
I think that what we're going to see, and this is going to impact the PLM space from a collaboration perspective, but also a core design perspective. It gets back to the common parts, reuse of common parts, and then having multiple sources in regions for those parts. So if you look at my company making a brake pad, for example, if we have an OEM that we're making a brake pad for that has a variation of that car in Europe that uses one brake pad, the variation of it in the United States has a different brake pad, and then the one in China has yet another third brake pad. That means that they're, at least regionally sourced, but it's still, if one of those parts, if you can't get those parts for some reason, it's going to be problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you all had the same design, same basic design,
Right.
then no matter what happens in any of those locations, you can just ship that one from whatever part of the world you need to.
Right.
So that's that flexibility piece of it.
So, well, this has been interesting, guys, and collaboration is important, especially in these days. And I appreciate your insights. And Jim, you gave us some great examples about why we need to collaborate, including the unpredictable ones around the way countries interact with each other. Thom, this has been interesting. We'll have to invite these guys back because I think this COVID thing will last a bit longer. It's what it looks like. So I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to Adam and Jim for joining us today and for the insightful conversations, because that's what we try to do here at the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. We want all of you who are listening, we want you to come back week after week. Craig and I have been doing this for a year and a half. We have no plans of stopping anytime soon. So please keep joining us, because we're going to keep bringing you really interesting people who can share ideas that are going to help you enhance your career. Because every single week, we bring guests who are going to have thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. Remember, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out right now at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.